torture should be abolished. Jeremy Bentham, who said in Britain that we should have a constitution, you know, we shouldn't be allowed to just arrest people and stick them in prison and stuff. All of this came from what we generally call the liberal tradition. And unfortunately, it's been under attack by the political extremists on the dualist side. But the liberal tradition, which is embodied in the European Union ideal, is we're all one society, a rainbow society. We can work through our problems together. It's not an us and them. Nobody's excluded from the project. And if you go back to Gladstone, the greatest liberal leader Britain had, that was the vision, or Lloyd George, when he introduced social insurance and pensions and things into this country. The poor shouldn't be excluded from society. Anyway, so that's political dualism. It's a problem. Right, so now I want to move on and ask, well, what's the solution? What's the answer? I've given you the problem, political dualism. I'm going to suggest that to solve this problem, we have to do some quite major rethinking of what we're doing here on this planet as individuals, both individually but also collectively. I'm going to propose the following hypothesis, that actually what we're supposed to be doing here is working towards enlightenment. Okay. Now, I don't care which philosophy or school of thought you're coming from, or if you follow a guru or no gurus, or you're a guru. Let's just start with the hypothesis that we're working towards planetary enlightenment of some kind. And we can define that in different ways. But most schools of philosophy and teaching, schools that deal with metaphysical spiritual development, would say that enlightenment is accompanied by joy, by peaceability, by happiness, by care and compassion for the other, and that it's not an individual process. It's a collective or group process with your loved ones, your family, your community, your society, or your sangha. And this is what I call the meta-Mahayana practice. I was inspired by people back in the 70s when I used to live in Dartmouth in 73, and just starting my spiritual practice, I met some Californian hippie Buddhists who were on the path, and that was very enlightening to me because I didn't know there was such a thing as enlightenment. Then I discovered Chogyam Trungpa and transpersonal Buddhism, and I've never looked back. And I think from a meta-Mahayana practice, each nation can be seen like a bodhisattva. If you think from a planetary perspective, each nation, be it China, Korea, Japan, England, Scotland, Wales, France, Cornwall, whatever, I like to think of them all as collective beings, like bodhisattvas, all working towards enlightenment in their own pace and time and speed, and all having different qualities and achievements. The British soul, if you want, is very good at engineering and, kind of pragmatic scientific discourse with people like Newton and Bacon. We can know how to fix things and get stuff to work. And we invented the internet through, our man in MIT. Other nations, like the French, are better lovers, probably. They're very romantic, and they love poetry, and make wine. And so each bodhisattva is doing its own thing. It's working towards enlightenment in its own way, in its own pace. And I think we have to look at our political dualism problem from the standpoint of enlightenment. We have to project forward to our collective enlightenment as a planet, and then look back at how we get there from the mess we're in. Okay. Right, so I want to just remind colleagues, I don't know if you're familiar with any kind of Buddhist or metaphysical teachings, but it's a teaching that comes up in all the faiths. The one thing you've got to avoid on the bodhisattva path towards your own personal enlightenment is the temptation to go for siddhis, supernatural, paranormal abilities. You've got to eschew the personal power syndrome of accumulating siddhis, like the ability to fly through walls, or see all the past open up before you, or misuse your precognitive skills to win the lottery every week, to cheat, because those skills will come to you as you pursue the enlightenment path. You will achieve telepathy and clairvoyance and synchronicities, but you can only use them for healing and benefiting others. You can't use them for personal advantage. That's the law of the cosmic code, which is in Buddhism, it's in Jainism, and that's the law of karma, right? You cannot use these acquired powers for your own personal ego advantage. You can only put them at the service of the community. And it's the same in the Druid path, which I've also had a lot to deal with, because I've worked on mediation for the Druids of this Britain and Ireland, as I said at the beginning. And again, in the Druid literature, there are some Druids that would use it for ego purposes and be able to fly through the air and make magic. Others who would work for the community. Those ones, by and large, also accepted Christianity, because they saw Christ as a Druid in that tradition. He obviously didn't do it. Although he had temptations to, the devil said, look, use it for your power, mate, become king of the world. He said, no, I won't do that. I will just heal people and teach. So that's very important that we remember on the path to enlightenment. Now, what I'm going to put to you is that Brexit, as an ideology, has been sold to us by the dark lords of the internet and the fallen angels of disintegration as a temptation towards cities for our nation. What they've told this nation is, you can be a superpower again. You can get out of that European nasty, cloying thing that gets you. You can become a superpower and have trade deals with everyone in the world. You can make really fast things that will fly to the stars, better than those Europeans. It's like a voice whispering, saying you can accumulate these magical cities after you kill the Wicked Witch of Europe, right? And if you actually think about it from an enlightenment perspective, that's the level at which this discourse is, in fact. From a metaphysical perspective, it was like a demonic force conjured up to appeal to the worst and lowest possible egos of the masses, who don't have the equipment, morally or spiritually, to fend this off, because they're bombarded with advertisement all the time. You need more, you need to be the best, you need to get more, you need a better job, you need more weapons, you need a wall to keep the other people out, etc., etc. And unfortunately, the moral compass is kind of, the wheel of the moral compass is in danger of falling off, and people bought into that mass brainwashing of you can have your cities now. And so what should have been our conversation and pursuit of common righteousness as a nation, which is what it was founded on, how to pursue righteousness, with our European neighbours and colleagues. I mean, there are things about Europe that should be transformed, and we need to get our righteousness conversation into that. But instead of that, it's become an arrogant conversation. We're so much better than Europe. We're just better at everything. So we're going to leave them and leave. They will fall apart. I hear this a lot from extreme Brexiteers. When we leave the European Union, the whole thing's going to collapse. The euro's going to collapse. They're all going to be fighting in the streets. So what? Nah. Now that is coming from an ego place. That is a demonic temptation, in my opinion, from the bodhisattvic perspective. So I'm going to go even further. I'm going to say, by definition, this is the definition of black magic. This is what, if you read the literature, Faust and the heroes of the black magic tradition, even down to Aleister Crowley and some of the other contemporary ones, black magicians work for their personal advancement by accumulating these powers and cities, and forget about anybody that gets hurt. The poor, don't care about them, the ill, the sick, no, forget them. We can, euthanasia is fine. Gas them. That's where Hitler was coming from. These are the real black magicians, or the people behind him, of history. And I'm presenting to you, apologies, that these are the forces behind the Brexit illusion. And of course they're not saying this in the media, but if you develop the eyes to see, if you advance your own enlightenment practice, you will see through their game. That's what they're saying, and that's where they're coming from. Now, the moral cost of this is going to be the loss of our soul as a nation, as I'll explain after the break. If the UK was created through love and unity, it will fall apart. If we listen to these black magicians and attempt it and go for the ego that Brexit symbolises, And I'm listening to the Tory MPs saying, Britain's better than Europe, we're going to leave, we're the best in the world, you know, types of people. Then the karma kicks in. You know, as Scotland leave, Ireland and all the rest of it, the counterforce to karmic egotism is humiliation. Right? And that's what we've seen in the last couple of years, because Theresa May has been trying to implement this thing, and she can't. She's at the mercy of these black magicians and doesn't know what the hell's going on, with all due respect. She thinks she's doing the right thing. I met Theresa May when I was teaching in schools, and she has not a clue about philosophy and ethics and everything I'm saying. You know, I wish to God she'd studied more philosophy at school. Where do we look to for light? Who can help with this situation? Well, in the traditions of esotericism, there is a teaching about, like an international network, if you want, of the masters of wisdom, the hierarchy, some people call them, the forces of light. There are different names for them. And figures like the Comte de Saint-Germain are often invoked as people that represent their teachings. And it's very interesting, I've been on the traces of the Comte de Saint-Germain recently in France, because he was at the court of Saint-Germain outside Paris, where King James II was exiled to, who they regarded as the true king of Britain and Ireland, who lost the Battle of the Boyne and ended up at Saint-Germain. And the Comte de Saint-Germain was one of his diplomats who worked internationally, but he was also an advanced esotericist. And the thing about these international networks of light workers, they're sometimes called, is they are true universalists. They don't just go for one nation or even one religion, you know. They manifested in the work of the Theosophical Society, for instance, where I'm giving this talk in a couple of days' time. And if you read the writings of the early Theosophists, they talk about this. And in the Alice Bailey tradition, likewise, this idea of an invisible network of light workers who work throughout history without reward, without recognition, without, you know, they don't have to be in the limelight. A true one will never be out there in the public eye. But their teachings are, as far as I can tell from what I've studied of them, the contrary to the racist, kind of nationalist narrow-mindedness of the Brexit fantasy world. So it's crunch time, and it's interesting that our country is literally voting as we speak. I hope to God that we can begin to see the universal light and choose the right thing here. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. That's halfway through my talk. Let's have a little break. And any questions?